Watching people who burn with the desire to shape their own destiny and give their all to achieve their goals always brings positive emotions. However, the tragic irony is that the paths of such ambitious individuals often cross with those who are capable only of destroying everything around them. These encounters all too often end in criminal cases. On July 25, 2004, in the small American town of Fernley, located in the state of Nevada, Naomi Irion was born. The girl became the third child in a family that was already raising two sons. However, 2 years before her birth, the family had endured a terrible loss. Their younger son Sean had passed away in infancy due to serious health problems. This tragedy dealt a devastating blow to the Irion family, especially to the mother, who was forced to seek professional psychological help to cope with her grief. More than 12 months passed before Diana became pregnant again. The news of her upcoming motherhood created a complex emotional cocktail in the woman's heart, joy mixed with anxiety, as the fear of losing another child never left her for a moment. Besides the emotional turmoil, the pregnancy was accompanied by numerous medical complications. Doctors discovered a whole host of problems, which meant the expectant mother was practically under constant medical supervision. The probability of losing the child was extremely high, so the first cry of newborn Naomi was a true celebration for Diana. A completely healthy girl had come into the world. From then on, the family consisted of the parents and two children, the older son and little Naomi. However, the parents dreamed of a large family and didn't plan to stop at 2 children, so in 2018 they adopted 3 boys. By that time, Naomi had grown enough to actively help her mother care for her younger brothers. The Irion family led a life filled with various events. The father, Irvin, worked in the diplomatic service, which required constant business trips and relocations. The professional activities of the head of the family allowed all family members to see practically the entire world. Throughout her childhood and youth, Naomi managed to live in France, Germany, Russia, and South Africa. The girl was distinguished by an inquisitive mind, quick wit, and easily found common ground with her peers. However, due to the constant changes of residence, she couldn't form a stable circle of friends. Despite this, in each country she stayed in, she made at least one close girlfriend with whom Naomi continued to communicate from a distance. The year 2021 marked the completion of her education at the American International School of Johannesburg. Despite all the travels and adventures, the Irion family adhered to rather traditional views and a modest lifestyle. Both parents were hardworking people. Even Diana, with 4 children on her hands, sought professional self-realization and couldn't just be a homemaker. Naomi's interests included literature and music. She had mastered playing the ukulele, guitar, and piano, and also had a decent singing voice. The girl constantly worked on self-improvement, and numerous travels allowed her to deeply familiarize herself with different cultures of the world. When Naomi turned 18, the Irion family was still living in South Africa with no plans for an immediate move. But the young woman didn't want to stay there and decided to return to the USA, to her native Nevada, where her older brother Casey had moved earlier. For Naomi, this move symbolized the beginning of an independent adult life. Casey gladly agreed to take in his sister and help her adapt in their homeland. Full of determination and confidence, the girl crossed the ocean toward her dreams. Naomi quite quickly found a job at Panasonic Corporation, whose branch was located near her native Fernley. She got a position in the battery production division. Despite her young age, only 18 years old, the girl demonstrated remarkable maturity, ambition, and a drive for career growth and financial independence. Understanding that achieving her goals required money, Naomi began diligently saving. Her dream was to purchase her own home, as she was currently living with her brother and his girlfriend. Additionally, part of her savings was intended to pay for future college education. The production facilities where the girl worked were located at a considerable distance from her residence. However, the company took care of its employees by organizing corporate transportation, a bus that picked up workers from several points in the suburbs. One of these points was a stop near the Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of Fernley. Every morning, the girl would drive her own car to the parking lot, wait for the corporate transport, and head to the factory. At the end of her shift, the same bus would bring her back to the parking lot where her car was waiting, and she would drive home. This route became Naomi's daily routine, which she repeated almost every day for several months after moving. This schedule completely satisfied her, and her parents fully supported their daughter in her aspirations. Her brother was serving in the Navy at that time, working at Apple Corporation, and simultaneously pursuing higher education. Saturday, March 12, 2022, began for the main character of this story as an ordinary workday. According to her routine, the girl woke up before dawn, got ready, and headed in her own vehicle to the Walmart parking lot. She arrived at approximately 5 a.m. Since there was time before the corporate bus arrived, she stopped at a gas station and also bought breakfast at a local cafe. Returning to her car, she had her snack and checked social media. Data from her mobile device shows that Naomi was browsing her news feed from 5:09 to 5:23 a.m. while waiting for the corporate transport. Several of her work colleagues were nearby at the stop, also waiting for the bus, but they weren't staying in their cars. Around 5:30, they witnessed a strange scene. An unknown man appeared next to the girl's car, leaning into the open driver's window. It was a male in a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. Witnesses saw him exchange a few words with Naomi, after which she moved to the passenger seat. The stranger took the driver's seat, and the car left the parking lot in an unknown direction. At first, this incident didn't cause particular concern. Colleagues assumed it was one of the girl's acquaintances who had asked for a ride, and that she would return soon. But when the division manager at the Panasonic plant repeatedly asked about Naomi's whereabouts, it became clear to her colleagues, the girl had never shown up for work. Such behavior was absolutely uncharacteristic of her. Naomi valued her job extremely highly and had never allowed herself to miss a shift. The girl also had a habit of constantly staying in touch with her family. She regularly exchanged messages with her mother, father, and brothers. In particular, she always wrote upon arriving at work. The family worried about her, as they were at a huge distance, on another continent. Casey felt particular responsibility for his sister in America, so he was also always available for communication. But on March 12, 2022, everything changed. Suddenly, the girl stopped responding to calls and messages. Her relatives tried to contact her, sent numerous texts, but Naomi ignored everyone. After several hours of futile attempts to establish contact, the parents raised the alarm and urgently contacted their older son. Casey immediately called the company. He assumed his sister might be overwhelmed with work and simply didn't have the opportunity to be distracted by phone conversations, but decided to be safe and clarify everything. The brothers' concern turned into real anxiety when the department head reported that Naomi had never shown up at the plant that morning. She also added that she herself had repeatedly tried to contact the employee, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The manager suggested possible problems with Naomi, but the brother categorically rejected such versions, as he had spoken with his sister literally before she was supposed to leave for work. She had no other plans or difficulties, was in excellent spirits, and felt fine. Moreover, Naomi was an extremely responsible employee and viewed this job as the foundation for building her future. Therefore, the version that she had skipped a workday without good reason and hadn't notified anyone seemed absolutely implausible. Even if Naomi had needed a day off, she would have definitely arranged it in advance with the company management to avoid misunderstandings. In case of a sudden deterioration in health, she would have at least passed the information through colleagues at the stop or personally contacted the manager, and also sought help from her brother. But none of these scenarios had occurred. The family feared something serious had happened to the girl. Naomi's parents, being on another continent, couldn't personally join the search for their daughter, so they entrusted this to their older son Casey. He drove the entire route that Naomi usually traveled, spoke with her colleagues and acquaintances, but no one had seen the girl. Casey felt the situation was becoming threatening, so he didn't waste time waiting for a response from Naomi and immediately went to the police to file a missing person report for his sister. Law enforcement immediately began active work on the case. The first step was interviewing the missing girl's relatives. Casey reported that the day before her disappearance, Naomi had had a romantic meeting with a young man in Reno. According to him, they had met through a dating app, though the brother couldn't say exactly which one. The date turned out to be brief and unsuccessful. The guy didn't make a positive impression on Naomi, and she wasn't planning to continue communicating with him. Casey expressed doubts about this acquaintance's possible connection to his sister's disappearance. Additionally, the brother of the missing girl shared information about an incident that had occurred a few days before the tragedy. Naomi had complained about inappropriate sexual behavior from one of her coworkers. The girl had officially reported it to company management, after which they had a conversation with the offender, and he stopped the harassment. Detectives were interested in both potential leads and thoroughly checked them. It turned out that both young men had solid alibis for the morning of the disappearance, so they were excluded from the circle of suspects. Detectives carefully analyzed Naomi's social media profiles and her accounts on dating platforms but found no alarming signals. There were no scheduled meetings in the near future, no messages from potential stalkers. The girl had no steady boyfriend or problematic ex-partners who might wish her harm. Considering her recent return to the city, she hadn't yet had time to form a wide social circle. The detective's conversation with employees who had been waiting for corporate transport with Naomi that morning brought important information about the unknown man who had taken the driver's seat in her car and left the parking lot with her. This information forced investigators to seriously consider the possibility that the girl had found herself in a dangerous situation. News of the disappearance quickly spread through Fernley, a small town with a population of 20,000. In such a tight-knit community, everyone knew each other, so the disappearance of a young girl caused general concern. Over the next 3 days, police made maximum efforts to determine Naomi's fate, using mass media to appeal to local residents, but no useful information came in. Against the backdrop of no progress in the investigation, the community's anxiety only intensified. In this quiet area, such incidents had never occurred before, which added even more tension to the situation. When some progress in the investigation emerged on March 15, this news did nothing to calm the residents of Fernley. A citizen reported a car that had been sitting motionless in one place for 3 days. Upon receiving this information, law enforcement representatives went to a remote industrial zone. On site, they discovered an abandoned car several kilometers from the city limits. Checking the registration number confirmed it was missing Naomi's car. However, inspection of the interior gave no clues for further searches, neither the owner, nor her personal belongings, nor any notes or indications of her whereabouts. The location where the car was found raised additional questions, as it wasn't on any of the girl's logical routes, neither to home nor to work. It seemed as if the vehicle had been deliberately hidden in this remote location. The car was sent for forensic examination, but the investigation revealed no traces of violence, blood, fingerprints, DNA samples, or any other physical evidence. Everything looked as if the interior had been carefully cleaned. The girl's fate remained a complete mystery. By this time, the search for 18-year-old Naomi had become the main topic of discussion in town. Several volunteer search groups were organized. Search operations were conducted both on the ground and using aerial means. Everyone hoped that Naomi would be found alive and well. But the discovery of the abandoned car in the industrial zone only increased general anxiety, especially considering that more than 3 days had passed, and the likelihood of finding the missing girl alive was rapidly decreasing. In connection with these circumstances, local law enforcement turned to the FBI for help, hoping that federal resources would help uncover more evidence and possibly identify the mysterious man in the hood that the girl's colleagues had witnessed. Representatives of the Federal Bureau of Investigation decided to analyze video recordings from surveillance systems, of which a sufficient number were installed in the Walmart parking lot. However, this meant hundreds of hours of video material requiring detailed study, which demanded significant time expenditure. To accelerate the search efforts and obtain important information, the FBI announced a monetary reward of $10,000 for any truthful information that would help establish Naomi's whereabouts. However, even this measure didn't bring quick results, only false reports came in. City residents were in a state of strong concern for the girl's fate. The uncertainty of the situation was especially frightening, as it could mean the appearance in Fernley of a dangerous criminal who hunted young girls. 17 days passed from the moment of Naomi's disappearance until a dramatic turn occurred in the investigation. On March 29, information came to the police station that directed investigators to a rural area in Churchill County. This area was located more than 50 kilometers from Fernley, where the missing girl was last seen. It was a remote area with low population density. The girl had no acquaintances or any business in these places. The very fact that the information led detectives here was quite an alarming signal. The detectives' arrival in this area wasn't random. A witness had contacted police reporting that on the day of the girl's disappearance, he had seen a vehicle here matching the description of Naomi's car. Police conducted a thorough search of the area, and after several hours of searching, they came upon a patch of ground showing signs of recent disturbance. It turned out to be a shallow grave containing the nude body of a girl. A forensic medical examination allowed them to identify the victim. It was 18-year-old Naomi Irion. The cause of death was 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest, the other to the head. In addition, the examination revealed traces of physical and sexual violence, numerous scratches and bruises on the body. The body was transported for pathological examination, and the girl's family was given the tragic news. Brother Casey took this loss particularly hard. The man felt personal guilt for the tragedy, believing he had failed to protect his sister from such a terrible fate. He expressed his pain and grief through posts on his social media page, making several entries. Close people tried to support him and ease his suffering. The Irion family urgently flew to the United States to organize Naomi's funeral ceremony. From then on, their main goal became achieving justice. Unfortunately, police representatives at that time couldn't provide specific information. It was necessary to establish the identity of the stranger in the hood, clarify the reasons why he had taken the driver's seat in Naomi's car and left the Walmart parking lot with her, and determine his involvement in her death. After the missing person case was reclassified as an investigation of a particularly brutal murder, the police together with the FBI intensified efforts to identify the criminal. By this point, they had managed to process a significant portion of video materials from the parking lot surveillance cameras. The recordings captured the same man the witnesses had described. The footage showed an unknown person moving through the parking lot area, constantly wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled over his face. He was wearing jeans and dark athletic-type footwear. His presence in the parking lot was recorded before 5 a.m., that is, before Naomi's arrival. It seemed he was looking for someone, perhaps the criminal was searching for a victim, as his behavior appeared aimless and suspicious. At 5:24, cameras captured him near the girl's vehicle. For several minutes, he watched her from a certain distance, then moved toward the car. Analysis of the video recordings showed that the perpetrator spent some time by the driver's window, exchanging brief words with the girl. His hand was constantly in his pocket, and the hoodie had a characteristic bulge that could indicate a concealed firearm. This was likely a way of intimidating the defenseless victim to force her to remain silent and not attempt to call for help. Then the stranger abruptly opened the door, after which Naomi moved to the passenger seat. The perpetrator himself took the driver's seat. During these actions, the kidnapper was captured from different angles by several cameras. This allowed for a partial reconstruction of his appearance. Additionally, they managed to trace his vehicle. He had arrived at the parking lot in a pickup truck, whose license plates were caught by video cameras, although the image was unclear. FBI specialists joined the process of improving video quality and detailed analysis of the obtained images. According to expert estimates, Naomi's kidnapper was a male between 30 and 40 years old. Specialists compiled his psychological profile. In the analyst's opinion, he lived in close proximity to where the girl was kidnapped. The most significant help in identifying the main suspect came from the established license plate of his pickup. FBI agents determined that the owner of this vehicle had been detained by police 4 days before Naomi's body was found in Churchill County. The person who fell under suspicion turned out to be 41-year-old Troy Driver. At the time of identification, he was already free, as evidence of his involvement in the previous crime was insufficient to keep him in custody. However, it became clear that police attention to this man was not accidental. First of all, law enforcement representatives decided to study the suspect's biography in detail. The investigation revealed his long history of violent crimes. Moreover, the tendency toward cruelty had manifested in childhood when he lived in California. At 12 years old, Troy received punishment in the form of community service for animal abuse and killing. Only 2 years passed when the 14-year-old teenager again found himself in conflict with the law. During 1994, he committed a series of burglaries, stole firearms, and robbed retail locations. Due to his minor status, he was sentenced to probation for these acts. Of course, such a verdict had no corrective influence on him. Not even 10 months passed before Troy was kicked out of his parents' home. The consequence was his placement in a state correctional facility for juvenile offenders. The basis for this decision was an attack on another teenager using a loaded firearm. Most likely, the purpose of the attack was robbery, and the victim boy was convinced he had been one step away from death. During a conversation with police representatives, the juvenile offender claimed that robbing was much easier than earning money through honest work. These were his arguments in defense of his chosen lifestyle when he preferred illegal methods of earning. At 15 years old, young Troy began consuming alcoholic beverages and later moved on to prohibited substances. The frequency of use constantly increased, and each time it was accompanied by outbursts of aggression. Regular peers avoided communicating with him out of fear. Instead, he easily found common ground with representatives of the criminal environment. Despite all this, Troy's descent to rock bottom hadn't yet ended. April 1997 became a turning point when he moved from petty offenses to armed attacks, one of which ended in participation in murder. He again used a firearm and took the life of another young man. The victim's body was left on a highway outside the city, his vehicle was stolen and later found burned in another location. This was how Troy tried to destroy evidence in California. Despite all attempts to hide traces of the crime, the young man was quickly apprehended. He was charged with robbery, burglary, illegal possession and use of firearms, complicity in murder, and destruction of evidence. The boy categorically denied his guilt on all counts. Despite this, in 1997 the court found him guilty and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Troy didn't demonstrate exemplary behavior while serving his sentence, but the criminal was released early, after 12 years on parole. The next 24 months he was under supervision. During this period, it seemed he had chosen the path of correction. Troy for the first time began earning income through legal means, found work, even tried to start a family, although these attempts proved futile. By 2014, law enforcement stopped close surveillance of him. It was believed he no longer posed a threat to the public. It's difficult to determine exactly which crimes and how many he might have committed in the following years. However, he wasn't arrested until 2022. Until he became a suspect in the murder case of 18-year-old Naomi Irion, and this crime showed signs of unmotivated aggression. Troy had no acquaintance with his victim at all, judging by witness testimony, and Naomi had given him no reason to attack. At this time, Troy was employed as an excavator operator, living with his girlfriend in a small town called Fallon in Nevada. Law enforcement representatives spoke with her. The suspect's girlfriend showed willingness to cooperate. She reported that her boyfriend had planned to go hiking on March 11th to 12th, which was why he was absent those days. The woman took this calmly, as Troy enjoyed hiking and active sports, while usually leaving his mobile phone at home. It became clear that he could have been using this as a cover for illegal activities. When police showed interest in her boyfriend, the woman revealed his unhealthy obsession with serial killers. He constantly read books about them and listened to podcasts in all his free time. However, in everyday life he didn't show aggressive behavior, so she had no idea he was capable of such acts. While interviewing the suspect's inner circle, they managed to establish that shortly before the attack on Naomi, Troy had been in contact with his girlfriend's daughter. The girl was also an employee of the company where the victim worked. Troy questioned her about how the bus operated that Panasonic Corporation used to transport its employees. He was interested in the route it took, where it stopped, and how long it waited for workers. Troy thoroughly clarified all related details, including departure times and even the number of passengers at full capacity. The man explained his interest by saying he also wanted to get a job there. But now the terrifying truth was revealed. When the forensic medical examination of Naomi's body was completed, they managed to find a DNA sample from the perpetrator after which matched Troy's genetic profile. It was he who had killed and murdered her. Investigators had obtained irrefutable evidence of the man's involvement in this terrible crime. When all this became known, Troy was at home in Fallon. The detention on an unrelated incident had ended. On March 25, 2022, police officers arrived at his residence and arrested him. The 41-year-old man was charged with murder, first-degree kidnapping, robbery, rape, vehicle theft, and destruction of evidence. However, Troy did not plead guilty to any of these charges. Bail was set at $750,000, but the detainee didn't have such funds, so he remained in custody. Thus, a long trial lay ahead in which Naomi's family planned to participate. According to the reconstruction of events, early in the morning Troy was wandering around the Walmart parking lot with one single purpose: he wanted to kill. The defenseless Naomi seemed like the ideal victim to him. She was sitting alone in her car, there was no one nearby except people waiting in the parking lot. But he probably thought no one would notice him. When Troy approached Naomi's car, he immediately began threatening the girl with a gun. The frightened Naomi moved to the passenger seat and let him behind the wheel, didn't dare call for help, hoping the criminal was only interested in valuables. After that, he left the parking lot in her car, heading to a remote area of Churchill County, where he carried out the assault, raped her under threat of using a weapon. Right there he buried her in a shallow grave. Then he drove the car to a pre-selected location where his pickup was parked. There he got rid of the victim's car, got into his own vehicle and disappeared. To cover his tracks, he later replaced the tires on his car. During the investigation, it was established that the burial site had been prepared in advance, dug approximately a month before Naomi's kidnapping. This indicated that Troy had been planning the murder for a long time and had carefully prepared for it. While awaiting trial, Troy was held in prison. During this time, several significant events occurred. On August 18, 2022, detectives received a confession letter written by Troy. He had first sent it to his ex-girlfriend, but immediately upon receiving this message, she gave it to investigators. The note was never fully made public, but judging from some excerpts that were released, Troy expressed something like remorse. The man stated that he didn't know Naomi but considered her easy prey. Additionally, he claimed in the note that none of his actions were sexually motivated. Sending this message to the girl wasn't a simple act of repentance. In fact, 2 days later he attempted to voluntarily end his life. However, the attempt was unsuccessful. Starting from the moment of arrest, he spent the rest of 2022 being transferred between different penitentiary institutions, simultaneously undergoing numerous psychiatric evaluations. Everywhere Troy was under enhanced supervision to prevent suicide attempts. Despite the attempt to voluntarily end his life, the criminal was found mentally competent and fit to stand trial. On March 7, 2023, the killer again tried to end his life. This time he cut himself but again failed. He named isolation as the reason for this act, the conditions under which he was being held in prison. After this, in June 2023, he was discharged from solitary confinement and transferred to a maximum security prison. Here he was to remain until the start of hearings scheduled for late 2023. On August 6 of the same year, guards observed the man behaving normally. He was engaged in his usual activities, no deviations were noticed during the check conducted at 5:22 p.m. Less than an hour later, at 6:17 p.m., another round was made. This time Troy was found in his cell without signs of life. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. 43-year-old Troy Driver had strangled himself. This time his attempt had achieved its goal. After this, the county sheriff held a press conference at which he expressed sympathy to the Irion family. He once again emphasized that they had irrefutable evidence against the killer. Therefore, his conviction following the trial would have been inevitable. Regardless of the defense strategy, the results of the DNA examination would have guaranteed him life imprisonment. The sheriff particularly emphasized that Troy's act only confirmed his cowardly and pathetic nature. However, this was small consolation for Naomi's loved ones, who had wanted to look him in the eye during the trial and hear the judge's verdict. In any case, this dangerous person would no longer be able to harm anyone. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.